action.
Yeah.
Leonard, you had this great development overseas, but of course in England or Britain you had trustees that your father had formed for you. Did they also control the overseas homes?
No, the trustees never had any control of any sort overseas. The same principle we adopted in England of leaving the individual committees to run their own homes was adopted overseas. So every country is completely autonomous. It has its own trust overseas, the same as we do here, though they operate probably a bit differently. But of course, all this period did see the emergence of the trust here in Britain. I know that the trust sounds rather a remote organization, but in fact it was the keystone round which, the cornerstone round which everything was built. In a sense, it was taking over my place. See, when there'd been the first 4 or 5 homes, I was the link, I was going round. I was the person who the committees might come to, though not necessarily agree with my views. Now the trust was taking this over. So we were forming a body of people who represented the different areas in which there were homes. They had to, of course, work out their own constitution, their own way of working from scratch, in the same way the committees did. Although it may sound a peculiar parallel, in their building up, I see the same struggle as the homes, because they had to face a completely new situation.
So each individual trustee is responsible for a group of homes?
Yes, more or less. One trustee will have, every home will have a trustee who looks after it. The trustees come from different parts of the country. They meet, they used to meet once a month. Now they had to, and still do, they had to meet their own travelling expenses themselves. It's often been argued, well, should we not pay their travelling expenses, because to come down from Scotland or Wales is a big expense. But every time it's been brought up, the trustees said, no, if we're asking the washerwoman or whoever you like to come and help in a home, and she doesn't get her bus fare, how can we as trustees claim our travelling expenses? So they've met these expenses entirely themselves. We have this problem now that the homes have grown to a reasonable number now, of personal contact. We've got this perpetual problem of remoteness. You have to have a body who are going to look at it from the from the top, going to see the long-term perspective, going to coordinate the activities of the homes, going to ensure that the aims and principles are kept, and at the same time allow virtual autonomy to each home. The problem is, how do you marry these two rather contradictory elements? And there's no denying that this is a great problem. And I don't think we've entirely solved it. And I'm quite sure that many homes feel that the trustees are rather remote. In fact, they're giving a great deal of their time, and they don't want to be remote, but they're just the sheer difficulties of knowing how to overcome it. And this is one thing that we've undoubtedly got to work out.
Yes, this would also come round to management, a management structure for what is now a vast empire, isn't it? Cheshire Foundation.
I should hate to think of it as an empire. Well, my great hope is that we will go on trying to meet the need, in other words, expanding, but without building up bureaucracy. The one thing that I'm absolutely insistent on in my own mind, and I know that the trustees are too, is that we do not build up the overhead, administration and expenses beyond the point that is really necessary. And there's a great temptation as you grow to say, well, we must have proper control, we must have a big office staff and so on. We are struggling not to do this. Of course, we can claim that our administrative expenses are less than 2%. That's very low. The danger is, of course, you may make economy of administration costs an end in itself, which is quite wrong. But I know that one must keep these to a minimum. We like to think of each home being its own little unit, developing in its own way and experimenting, because we know perfectly well that we are in a new field, that the whole world is beginning to work out the problem of how to integrate a disabled person into the community so that he feels part of it, so that he can play the fullest possible role in the community. We have a tiny little part in this big whole new movement. I mean, our role, we must admit, is limited, but it's an important one. And so my wish is that we will always be forward-looking. And I hope that every member of the foundation, whether a resident or staff or helper or trustee, will always be ready to rethink. I find it's very easy to fall into a groove. You know, what I've done in the last 15 years has been successful, therefore go on. But it isn't necessarily right. Things change, circumstances change. What was right yesterday was right yesterday, but may not be right today. And this ability to rethink, to examine yourself, is all important. And that's why we so badly need the young. We need involvement of the young at every level. And I think that of all the things that have struck me over these years has precisely been the concern of young people from primary school upwards in the needs of others. To me, this is very moving. It's very inspiring. I think it's given me more, how can I put it, support and almost motivation than anything, because I know it wasn't so in my day. From the first day that little boy walked up to St. Teresa's with his duck, to today when schools in West Lancashire have raised £13,000, more than half the sum that the whole committee's raised in 2 years for the building of a new home. It's been the involvement of the young. Of course, the young have got to learn how to do it. They come with vigor and initiative and idealism, great idealism. But it also needs channeling into the right path. And this is where I hope the Service Corps is going to play its great role, that the Service Corps will accumulate knowledge of the disabled. We can't offer a diploma so that the person who goes through the course can go out into the world with a diploma. Sadly, we can't. But I do believe that we can offer know-how. And we want to offer security in a future. We want to think that the future matrons, or whatever you call them, house mother, whatever the name is, it doesn't matter, of the homes will come out of the Service Corps. In the Service Corps, we see the means of providing the right care staff. We've got to. It's a joint effort. Involvement by residents, by trustees, by committees, and by members of the Service Corps. We're all together trying to work out what is the right way of building a home and running a home in which those who live in it, the residents, can flower, can feel that here is a life that they want, and therefore can make their tremendous contribution to society.
The disabled making an immense contribution to society.
Well, they've changed my whole life. I mean, they've given me something to live for, to work for. It's the same with Sue, my wife. I mean, her life is entirely pulled by the great example of the disabled and the privilege, really, of being with them. And this feeling of unity, you know, they draw us together. My travel throughout the world have enabled me to meet people and know people I'd never have met otherwise, to learn new ideas. You realize your own ideas you thought were so good are not always so good. We need this involvement of the whole world, whatever nationality, whatever condition of the country. Each has got his own contribution to make. We're trying to gather it within our tiny little field. I don't pretend our field is big, it isn't. But it's our field and we must do the best we can in it. And I hope that everybody who's concerned will feel the same, and out of it we'll get fulfillment and a realization that the tiny little drop makes up the ocean.
Yes, and of course this tiny little drop, this field, brings its own energy, the place of the disabled in society, which must cause intense discussion in the homes, which these young people will have to cope with.
You get such differing opinions, you know, people feel so deeply about it, you get almost fights in a way that perhaps you don't get in normal life, because people identify their own ideas with the good of the cause. People identify their own ideas with the good of the cause, and therefore they feel they must fight for it. And often in charities you get this almost bitter clash. It really derives from goodwill, you know, this conviction that what I'm doing is for the good of the resident. You also find, of course, an insularity amongst charities. You find that each charity thinks that this is the all-important world. I mustn't let anybody else interfere with me. I'm the person who should get the most help from the neighbourhood. There is an unfortunate insularity amongst charities. In a sense, what is their strength is also a source of their weakness. And I think this is something we must fight against, that we must be willing to collaborate with others, to give, to find ways of working together, of even sharing resources. We must not become insular.